Hello, everyone. Welcome to Burn the Wagon series with my guest today.
Hi, my name is Nunez Gonzalez, she, her, hers, so yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of an intro of like who I'm going to be interviewing today. So our topics today are going to be growing up in Santa Cruz as a person of color. Did I get that your pronouns right?
Yeah.
You just said it and I fucked up.
She, her, hers.
Okay, cool. And her experience applying to law school to help others that are incarcerated for marijuana and other such charges, and then a couple other topics. So I'm going to go ahead and let her give herself an intro, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so hello friends. My name is Lo, she, her, hers, like I said, and I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, California. Then I went to college in Portland in 2017, went to Portland State, stayed there for a little bit, and graduated last year virtually, which was kind of a bummer, right? But I've just been in Santa Cruz since, trying to figure it out, working at, dispensaries, and I've been really learning a lot just about the whole cannabis industry, so yeah.
Cool. And you graduated from...
Santa Cruz High.
Okay, Santa Cruz. And then from college, what virtual college did you...
So I graduated from Santa Cruz High in 2017, and then from there I went to Portland State University.
That's where you graduated from?
Mm-hmm,
Okay,
that's where I studied sociology, and I minored in communication. Then I graduated actually a year early, which was kind of even more of a bummer because it was kind of like, had I waited, then I would have had my ceremony and everything, but I had mine during the 2020 pandemic. And so that was kind of a really big turn for me because when I was at Portland State, I had already developed so many connections, and I was a student leader at a club, and I mean, my grades were great. I was really at a high point in my life, and so the abrupt transition to just online learning and online networking in Santa Cruz too, no longer in Oregon where I had, developed myself, but that was a really big change. And so I think that I really took it upon myself to use that opportunity to just start from zero, and I was really inspired by cannabis, so I was like, this is a great place to start.
Cool, hell yeah. And did you like Portland? Were you do you want to eventually go back, or?
Honestly, I love Portland because I hated going to Santa Cruz High. I did not like Santa Cruz. I felt like I didn't really belong there, and when I was in high school, I honestly thought I was a bad, dumb kid because even though I was in AP and honors classes, I was low-key not doing that great in them. I was getting C's and stuff, and so none of my teachers ever paid attention to me or anything, and so I really thought that I was not just a smart person. Then all of a sudden I go to Portland, and my professors are recognizing me, and I'm living in the city, and everything was just, perfect. I was finally getting acknowledged for my intellect, which is something that I had never really experienced before.
Yeah.
So, being in Portland just definitely inspired me, and so there are a couple of schools in Oregon that I'm looking for, and one of them is Lewis and Clark. So I really was just set on going back to Lewis and Clark for Portland, but now that I'm so involved with cannabis, I mean, there's really no place better to be in cannabis than the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know, I love Portland, but I know that the Bay Area is somewhere where I'm just going to find many opportunities that'll ultimately be better. So
okay. Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that in a bit. So first I kind of want to start with your parents and then their background and kind of where they're from. So where are your parents, where in Mexico are your parents from, if you're comfortable talking about
totally.
that?
My parents, I think that my parents and my family have a big influence on, where I want to go. So both of them are first-generation immigrants from Jalisco, Guadalajara. And they've been from Guadalajara for generations now, and they moved to Santa Cruz in the 90s, I think, and then they've just been living here since. And I think that my parents' immigrant background, specifically their Mexican immigrant background, really did have a big influence in who I am now as a woman and just overall person in the U.S. because, I mean, it's so many reasons, but I think many children of immigrants can relate to that sentiment of hard work and ambition and really striving to do the most for your community. Yeah. And so I think that they've really impacted me in that way.
And did they meet here, or did they meet before?
No, they met in Mexico. Okay. So his dad actually, I recently learned, was a bracero. I don't know if you know about that program at all, but it was I think after World War II or something where the U.S. needed more labor forces, or during the wars, they needed more labor forces, so they would incentivize a lot of Mexicans by saying, come work here for a while for this amount of money, and then you can go back. It was like periodical work, and it was, you know, through this legal program of braceros.
Yeah.
And my grandpa was actually one of them, and so he would come and work in like the fields or whatever, Salinas, all of that, then go back. And my dad especially, he grew up with a lot of poverty, like just textbook immigrant, you know, very, very poor. And so that, I think, really inspired him, because he would see his dad come home and like all of this, you know, random, you know, money and toys and stuff that he had never seen before. And so my dad was the one who first came to America, and he would migrate back and forth. And then later, when my mom was in school, I think my dad really told her, you know, in order for our children to really have this future that we want for ourselves, we have to come up here, which I think is a very common, you know.
That must be very scary for him, like, to be coming back and forth and like leaving family, you know.
For sure.
I was talking about that the other day with somebody, to having to leave your homeland and go somewhere where you don't know what's going to happen is a very scary situation.
Very scary.
And at any time, like, they're always having to look at their back, you know, like who's watching, who's going to call ICE on us or whatever. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have a little sister. There's a pretty big age gap.
Okay.
She's 7 years younger.
Okay.
So she's 15 right now, and she's like, I just dropped her off at SoCal High this morning.
And do you speak Spanish, and have you ever been to your parents' like hometown?
Yeah, I grew up in Mexico and Guadalajara for like various periods of my life. I go there during the summers and stuff. I've really been wanting to go back because my aunt had a baby, so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I definitely grew up going there, and I speak Spanish at home. My sister not so much, but I definitely grew up, you know, that was my first language, so yeah, I'm very big on my Mexican heritage for sure.
Awesome. And is there any things that you've learned in that, like, in from your Mexican heritage when you've gone back that you'd like to share with others, or that may not be like a known thing?
I don't know if necessarily like any specific thing, but something that I've really found is, you know, and both my mom and my friend Luis, he kind of pointed this out to me, but in the US there's this like, oh, if you're educated, that has to do with academia, like how far you go in school. But in Spanish, in Mexico, that's all I really know anyway, like educado is just someone who has, you know, good manners, is respectful of others, knows how to communicate and, you know, engage with others around them. And I think that that's something really important that I've made the distinction. When I graduated college, I was at this like really high top where I like thought I was on top of the world and all this stuff, because all of a sudden I have a degree. And it's been a very humbling year to realize, you know, that there's a lot of like intellect and experience that's not just academic. And I think that term educado has really, you know, sunk with me.
Oh, nice. So, how do you pronounce it?
Educado. It's just like the word for educated, but I think there it means a more holistic sense of educated, you know, than just academic.
Yeah, and that's cool. I really like that. I really like that saying, and that's a really cool thing to like.
To be educated.
Yeah, it also carry yourself as, you know. I think that's a very humble and like noble thing to be carried as. So recently you mentioned a couple times Santa Cruz High and dropping your sister at Santa Cruz High. So
I dropped her off at SoCal, but I was
SoCal. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I kind of want to touch on being raised in Santa Cruz, and, you know, like you said, you didn't really like going to Santa Cruz High, and like the reasons why, like feeling that way. You know?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in like various different places. I moved a lot when I was a kid, but my most stable house was probably in Watsonville, like right behind the Green Valley Cinema. I lived there for like a decade, but that whole time I was going to school at Santa Cruz High because my parents like still lived on the west side or worked in the west side. And so that was really interesting because I grew up with a ton of just rich white kids, honestly. And so I had this perception of, oh, I'm poor, like I'm very poor, and don't get me wrong, there were periods of time where my family was, but I was also closer to being average in this America in a sense, you know? And so that was really hard because all of a sudden I'm in AP classes, and not only am I like one of the least performing, but also I'm just more poor, and also I'm brown compared to all these people, you know? So it was just kind of weird, and it definitely it took a lot of my self-esteem because I never felt like I belonged.
Yeah. And
there was never really a teacher except for maybe like one of my Spanish teachers and like a counselor that I can remember that was like, oh, you're different and it's okay, let me help you use that to your advantage. You know, it was always like, I was very like isolated as a kid, and I felt like, also, I mean, the whole AP thing is just so competitive. You know, like that's such a toxic environment that I think that at the time anyway, I was not prepared for all of that competitiveness and ego and
that's great. I didn't really think about those classes as to be like a competitive
yeah, and they
setting.
definitely were, because like all of a sudden, I mean, all these kids around me were like complaining and crying about how they'd get like an 86 on like a really, really hard test. Or like the whole SAT, the whole college acceptance process was really, really difficult for me, because again, like all of my peers were in AP classes, so they're getting into UCLA and stuff like that. I have all C's and I think I can get into UW, you know, University of Washington. And it was a really big reality check that all of the like maybe fucking around that I did in high school, like it all kind of came back to me. And I just didn't really feel any support in that. And there was so much competition for where you're going and how much you're doing. And even now I feel like I look back at that time and I'm like, why was that so competitive? Like, you know?
Did you feel any support once you went to Portland?
For sure. When I went to Portland, everything changed, because that was the first time in my life that all of a sudden everything that I was bringing to the table was getting recognized. My professors liked what I had to say, and my mentors wanted to work with me and use my differences and my, you know, vernacular to my advantage. And I wasn't just separated. And I remember my very first class at Portland State. It was like a sophomore year level class. I don't know why I was in it. It was Intro Latin American Studies. And I had just a very strict professor, and I really wanted to please him for some reason. I was like, if I can just get an A on your first quiz, that will really set the stage up. I really went into it with that mentality, and I did, and I felt very proud of myself. I was like, you know what, I worked hard. This is going to be different from high school. I'm just going to set my priorities straight.
Awesome.
And I think that it really benefited, and I loved Portland State.
And what class was that?
So that was Intro Latin American Studies.
Okay.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was taught by like an Argentinian professor who was like, his class was just very robust, very strict, but I think they motivated me a lot. I love Portland State.
Awesome. So I kind of want to move into you applying to law school and your motivation behind going to those places, and so the motivation behind it and the reasoning behind it.
So, where do I even begin with that? I always wanted to be a lawyer because I've always been a very outspoken and just determined, passionate person. So, I mean, to me, those qualities are attributed to, like, lawyers and stuff. I always see that. And so, I really always wanted that for myself. But, like I said, high school was so rough for me that I was like, who am I kidding? I'm never going to be able to do this. And then when I was in Portland State, I thought, okay, I can't do law. That's just way too hard for me. Let me stick to social work. That's what I know. I've always volunteered. That's what I'm good at. And I'm still very passionate about that still. So I took that route and, you know, graduated with sociology communications, came back to Santa Cruz. And it wasn't really until I started my Oaksterdam class that we'll, you know, talk about later on, that I realized that there was a big missing gap in the new legal industry of cannabis. Now, you know, me and all my friends are stoners, whatever, we love cannabis, but there is a big gap in terms of equity and equality in that market, and I think that that's really what sparked the, okay, you know what, it might be hard, but this is something that you need to do in me.
Awesome, that's really awesome. And you were saying the other day when we were talking, before you weren't really like a stoner. You and after educating yourself, was it after educating yourself that you became more into stoner weed, or did you kind of like start smoking weed and then being like, I want to educate myself?
I got it. So when I was in high school, I honestly was not super big on cannabis, and it was really, like, now that I'm learning all about it, I can see how I was affected by all of these stigmas. But when I was in high school, I again thought that like smoking weed was just like a bad, like addictive kid thing, because that's what my parents thought. You know, my parents would get mad at me when I would, you know, do any of that stuff. So to me, when my friends would like sneak off with their friends to go smoke weed, I was like, oh, they're doing something wrong. And it wasn't until I went to college that I was introduced to it, and all of a sudden it wasn't like a stoner drug. It was like weed, and it was cannabis culture, you know? And I remember the first people who ever like helped me smoke were like my friend Louise, Diana, Zoe, and Pete, who were like these Oregon little hippies, and they were just so gentle and beautiful with all of it that I was like, you know what, this is something that can help me. It isn't like this drug that I thought. And then the more I educated myself on how all of the stigmas got to where they be and why my parents thought all of these things that they thought about cannabis, the more I realized that we could reverse that.
And I think that's, this is just my opinion. I feel like in Mexican culture, weed is definitely like looked down upon.
Yeah, and that's all that I'm talking about too, is my parents come from a place, and it's completely valid, where they see weed and cannabis and stuff put together with gang violence and corruption and the cartels and worse drugs, right? And often, even U.S. people, like Americans, think that too.
Yeah.
And so how can they not be afraid when their daughter is participating in stuff when that's all that they know?
That definitely makes a lot more sense.
And I think that's something that I'm really trying to bring into the table, is that a lot of our communities of color, we hold these stigmas about, what cannabis is, what marijuana is, because we ourselves are victims of learning all of these intentionally racist stigmas.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And honestly, I never really thought about it like that. Yeah, because people are given like really crazy charges for like the smallest amounts of weed, and yeah, why is that? If like companies are making, like in California, companies are making millions of dollars, and in say Michigan, someone's locked away for 30, 40 years, for a gram of weed.
Right. It's just because, honestly, at the end of the day, the U.S. government needs to get it together and come up with one solution that is going to, I'm a strong believer in descheduling, which would ultimately get cannabis to be out of the Schedule 1 status that currently says it has no medical benefit, it's very addictive and prone to overdose. That's where it currently is. That makes it federally illegal statewide. And so by descheduling, that would really open the door for a lot of opportunities. And I think that, there's a lot of controversy in it though too, because within each new policy and each new piece of regulation, we see a lot of unintended consequences kind of coming back to hurt people of color, right? You gave the great example of like California. Well, why is it that now it's legal and we have these businesses, but yet we still see people of color the most criminalized, the most, disenfranchised by the industry? And it's honestly because all of the laws that are there are still put in place to keep those disadvantages there, They're just doing it more strategically now, which is a big reason for why I want to get into the law and for why I think we need more representation of color in cannabis, whether it's retail or law or, cultivation, because we need to stand up for all of these things.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned Oaksterdam a couple of times, which is a marijuana college in Oakland. And the dean has shouted you out, actually, personally.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to talk about that. And so, like, I know obviously Oaksterdam is like a marijuana-based college, but like what in the big picture, they're not just teaching how to grow weed, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? I just kind of want to tap in on that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you too for tapping in. I really am interested by the whole concept of Oaksterdam too, but it's kind of interesting. You could think of it almost like a trade school where you learn different trades that there are. And so the reason I did Oaksterdam was because the previous company that I worked for actually offered a program where if you took any course, they reimbursed it as long as you passed with above a B. So I was like, oh yeah, like free money, who's not going to do that? Yeah. And they have a business semester that's, I think, like 14 weeks long, a cultivation, which is the one where you actually learn to grow and all of that. They have like a bud tending one on like opioids and cannabis, activism and advocacy. They have like a whole bunch of branches. Cool. But in their business one specifically, I came into it thinking it was just going to be, how do you start a cannabis business? It's licensing, regulations, and steps. And it is very much that, but it also, the first class was I think it was like the prohibition and history lesson of like U.S. policies with drugs. And I think that was a really important thing to start off with because it talked about all of these things, where we learned about where these policies came from and why. And they also teach about, politics of cannabis. And I think that's really important.
That is really important.
Especially for people of color, because it talks a lot about how criminalization and, the new administrations that were coming in really do play a role in all of our daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important for people to understand that just because it's a weed college, it's not like you're not just going.
I know, right?
So, like,
it's really okay. I don't even know how to talk about Oaksterdam too to like people who aren't in the business without it not. And you know what? I actually got into some beef with people that I went to high school with because people don't take it seriously. And even when I'm talking to college or law school guidance counselors and stuff, like I'll talk and say my whole life story, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, cannabis, and then they'll be like, they double take because there's still like this confusion over what it is. But I mean, the world of cannabis is almost like, it's almost like the ocean, right? Where like you only know so little of it, but we know so much, and there's so much out there that we don't even know, and it's the same thing. Like, unfortunately, I think over 60% of the Bay Area's cannabis sales are still under the illicit market, and so we already know a lot, and that's not even half of what's out there, you know? So I think that it's really interesting because there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, and Oaksterdam really opens that door up, and it did for me anyway. It doesn't necessarily, I'm not going to say it's going to be the best for everybody, but for me it really did work in an inspiring way.
That's really good. And are you going to go back, or?
Well, I think it's more in like semesters really, but what I really got out of it was that the way that it worked for me, because it was virtual, was that it was based around this like fictional business pitch that you have, right? But regardless of the fact that it was actually fictional, everything that you had to have was like, it had to be on point. Like all of your licensing and stuff like that, your plans, your outlines for 2 years and everything. Then at the end of the course, you present your idea and you present it to a group of investors who are actual cannabis professionals. And that's where I actually got my recognition. Me and my group pitched this idea of like cannabis equity, essentially. And it's everything that I've been saying since the beginning, and I think it's everything that my group has been saying as well. And when we won our business pitch, one of the prizes was just like some recognition from industry people here and there, and I really try to use those platforms to amplify the people of color and some of these issues that I see to be most fitting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just want to tap in and see if we have any questions going in here. Cool, no questions right now. So, do you want to see if we have any questions on your?
I don't think so. I think people are waving, being cute.
You can wave at those people if you.
Hello. Yeah. I don't.
So if you tap, it waves at them. Yeah. Cute. Okay. So we can get. I kind of wanted to touch on. I didn't do too much research, but the fentanyl crisis that's happening here in Santa Cruz.
Yes.
I know there's, I think, 10 overdoses and like 2 deaths, I think, total. And I saw something on Facebook that 2 individuals were caught downtown with like 5 ounces of fentanyl and like some cash.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to see your thoughts and see if you had any input on that, because what's happening right now is people are finding it in weed.
Yes.
So I just wanted to tap in with you because you do work at Treehouse, which is a club here in Santa Cruz. So I just wanted to see the awareness you guys are bringing towards that type of stuff.
Totally. Well, honestly, I think it's really important to talk about it because it speaks a lot. Why, even though dispensaries are legal not only in California, all over the U.S. and everything is so easily accessible and tested, why are people still choosing to participate in the illicit market? And the reason why, it's not their fault. It is because it is still so inaccessible. It's legal, but being legal doesn't mean it's accessible. So, for example, I think that Treehouse does a great job at having representative and just like accessible prices. But despite that, sometimes people leave with a joint that's like one joint like 25 over that, like out the door, right?
Yeah.
Why would people go do that when they can just go find something random on the street or in their neighborhood for like $5, $10, right? So I think that more people who consume and enjoy and benefit from cannabis need to talk and shine light on these topics because, how inaccessible it is now is making it so that it's a cycle. Not only are people endangering their lives, but also just on a criminal sense, if it's, it's technically illegal if it's not done their way, just because it's decriminalized or whatever doesn't mean you can just go out and whatever. So, let me fix this real quick. So where I was going to with that though is that it says a lot about how much we're neglecting our communities if, despite it being this huge $1 million industry that's on every corner in Santa Cruz, in Portland, people are still choosing, and also disproportionately people of color are still choosing to participate in the illicit market. That means that something isn't working. That means that laws are not working. That means that dispensaries need to shine more light on it. That means that all of the stoners, the potheads, the people who enjoy weed, they need to, contact their representatives and get educated themselves, because this is only going to continue to happen. People are going to continue endangering their lives and also facing potential criminalization, but it's not always their fault. Can you blame them? The stuff is just so outrageous. So
yeah, it is pretty pricey. That's a big deal for me to not go to clubs. It's like, when I do, it's like, okay, I want to treat myself. I'm gonna go
Right.
I'm gonna go spend some money.
Yeah.
But like, I love going in there because the experience is awesome.
And it's important though. That's the thing, is that like, even if you don't, like, I'm the same way. I'm super cheap too. Like, I don't even want to, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's also just safer to. That's a big tip that I have, is just consume anything that is trustworthy.
Yeah.
And we have to create an industry where that is more accessible to people, and I think that a lot of it plays a big role in just the political sense.
Yeah, definitely. Because if they're allowing like weed stores to look like Apple stores, and people are locked away in prison cells for 40 years, it's
Yeah.
I feel like it's.
And what I've noticed is that it's our like BIPOC communities that want to change the game and like want to create dispensaries that aren't super expensive and like are accessible and make you feel comfortable. But they can't get their foot in the game because it's just so, again, inaccessible and expensive, all the licensing fees and strict. And so that's a big reason, again, for why I would want to go to law school, is to provide business consulting for young entrepreneurs of color to get their foot in the door and change that market completely.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's I think that's awesome, and I think for you to do that, it like is a motivating thing, because someone else might see you doing that and then take it upon themselves to want to do that as well.
Exactly.
Or take it upon themselves to see you doing that and then ask for your help, to say, I've always had this dream to do something like this.
Yeah.
What are the steps I need to take to do this?
Education is such a privilege, and academia is such a privilege, so it's like, let's use it for something good for once.
Absolutely. That's really, really good points. And I know that a couple of the deaths, I think, have been mainly in like the houseless communities. So like in my head, I don't know if an individual is like doing it as like they want to hurt people, or if it's just like they're wanting to get higher off this, what they think fentanyl is going to make their weed stronger. And
yeah, man, I didn't even think about it that way either, but the I guess pushing it outside of it is something that is a mystery of its own.
Because in that houseless community, there's a lot of people outside of that didn't like it, and so I obviously I don't want this to be true, but like it's a thought that went through my mind that somebody is going and doing it purposefully and to hurt these people, because a lot of people don't like the homeless crisis here in Santa Cruz, and we have the space, we have the money to fix it, but we just keep building apartments or
that's crazy.
hotels that
and it sounds like very like a conspiracy type of thing, but it's not. And I have a quote for you actually that I got from Oaksterdam, and it was one of the quotes that really just like sparked me. That I was like, someone needs to do something about this. And so this was said by John Ehrlichman. He was Nixon's domestic policy chief, and he said this: the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to either be anti-war or anti-black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. And this is from a 30-year-old interview that was with Harper's Magazine. And again, the guy's name is John Ehrlichman. And yeah, So
That's crazy. And this was
Nixon's domestic policy chief. The people who are putting these, they have admitted to it. That's the thing that's crazy to me, is that there's admitted racial intention behind every single policy in place.
Yeah.
So, and all of the intention is explicitly racist, xenophobic, and sexist. So it's like, you know, whenever you feel like, oh, well, what are these conspiracies? Stay woke to them.
Yeah.
Stay woke, because at the end of the day, they're there to hurt our people of color. So, you know.
And this is my big, like, obviously it sucks to have to be into these spaces and say we want to get involved in politics, but this is my big reason on, like, us getting involved in these things, because we can't keep marching year after year. Like, 30 years down the line, I don't want to, like, get my sign again in March for the same things that haven't been changed, because we don't want to get in these offices, we don't want to get in these spaces.
We can't keep getting bullied out of them.
Yeah.
I'm taking all of my practice LSATs, which is like the law school like entrance exam basically. And I mean, I'm doing average, but not the best. And it's like, I can't keep getting pushed out of these spaces.
Exactly.
You know, our people deserve more representation. And so whether that's in education or even just like spaces, you know, take up those spaces and be outspoken.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, that was, you put that very well, you know. I think that's all the questions I had for you. If you had any topics that you wanted to bring up that I didn't bring up throughout the day, if you want to speak more about the dean and your shout out that he gave you, that'd be cool. Yeah, if you have any questions for me, the floor is yours. Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure. Like, I don't know. I guess the only things I would really shout out are like, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this book. It's The Emperor Wears No Clothes. I like have it written all over. And this is probably one of the first things that opened my eyes to this conspiracy-like stuff that I'm talking about with the government. Because Jack Herrera, who is a really well-known cannabis activist, I mean, we all know Jack Herrera strains, right? So he was really the first person to shine light on all of these government issues. And so if anybody wants to like educate themselves, I strongly recommend The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And also if you have Netflix, watch Grass is Greener, because it's like super cool, dope ass documentary where they talk about these things. And I think that they're really important. And I mean, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me anytime further, like please do, because I love talking about this stuff and it's important, you know, it really is. And more people need to talk about it, especially women of color, for sure.
And I think, like you said, I think education is key. Educating ourselves is very important. We need to drop the stigma of educating yourself is like selling out or is being white. Educating yourself is just great to be educated. So, yeah, it's all for today. If anybody had any questions, I don't think anybody did as of right now. So yeah, I think we're done for the day. Thank you for joining me. That was a very good discussion. Yeah, that was amazing. If you have any questions, please follow her story and go buy some weed from her at some Treehouse dispensary.
Oh my God,
definitely. Thank you very much for joining me.
Okay.
And
cool.
Peace, love, and happiness, everyone.
Bye. Oh my gosh, I like don't even know how to turn this off.